Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasser, and this is the Azure Cleveland User Group. A little bit about the group. We meet every second Wednesday of the month. The meetings are free of charge and open to the public, and we cover a variety of topics related to Azure, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. You can find all the meeting information posted at meetup.com for past as well as future meetings at the link listed at the bottom of the slide. As always, a big thank you to our sponsors, PostSharp and DevExpress, for sponsoring the post-meeting prizes that will be raffled off using the eval form, the .NET Foundation for sponsoring the meetup space, and NIS Technologies for sponsoring the virtual meeting space. We have a special offer from Manning.com, 35% off a selection of books with the discount code MTPCLEC21 at the link listed at the bottom of the slide. The discount code and the link will be made available shortly after the presentation is over. Some general information. Please keep in mind participation is always encouraged, and the only stupid question is the one not being asked. However, when not speaking, kindly ask you to mute your microphones just to avoid any background noise. And we like to keep it casual but organized, meaning jump in with any questions or comments at any point in time, but we need to give our speaker enough time to go through the presentation. And lastly, the meeting is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube in just a few short days. So for tonight's feature presentation, we have Azure Functions and APIM presented by Brian Gorman. Brian has 15 plus years of .NET development experience. He has a master's in computer and information systems. He's a Microsoft Azure MVP and has been certified in multiple Microsoft certifications. And in addition, he's also a speaker, author, and trainer. And he joins us from the great state of Iowa. And with that, let me turn it over to Brian.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
So we're not going to have any slides today, so that's fun, right? So I want to point a couple things out before we get started on the actual presentation. First of all, one thing that wasn't mentioned in my bio, because it's fairly new, is that I'm actually part of a thing called the Microsoft Learn Expert team. And ultimately, if you are working towards any certifications, or if you're trying to just learn topics and you're on Microsoft Learn and you're having problems or questions, our goal is to give you a sounding board or a place where you can ask questions and get them answered. Obviously, we're not here to help you like solve all the world's problems for your job, but if it's a Learn module you're going through on AZ204 or AZ104, or if it's something like I'm trying to connect a VNet across to a hybrid connection with a VPN gateway, there are people on here who can help and assist with your questions. Let me just show you really quick what that kind of looks like. If you join, it's a Teams environment, so it's free. Obviously, Microsoft is doing all this to help the ecosystem, and there's a number of us that do it. So that first page was actually a link of who's in it, so you can see there's quite a few trainers and people out here that are doing this. So if you are interested, there's all kinds of, you can join as many of these rooms as you want. And they have different specializations like cybersecurity. Dwayne Natwick out of Michigan. You got Tiago, who also does Azure stuff out of Portugal, I think, or maybe Brazil. I'm not sure. One of those. I'm sorry, Tiago. I don't remember exactly which one. And ultimately, there's a number of people out there, including one that's a Microsoft team. That's actually Microsoft official employees that are technical trainers for the the 700, the 400, the 104, a bunch of certifications. So you join it for free, you get an invite, you're in the teams, and then you can join their channel. So like this is the Microsoft one. There's all the certs, so you can go out there, and they're often asking questions themselves and having you answer them. Here's my rooms. I do a room for fundamentals, so fundamental exams. DevOps and Azure development obviously is kind of my wheelhouse, and I actually have one that I'm doing for just intro to programming. That's another thing that I do, is I train programmers. So one of the things that Sam and I were talking about offline is the Microsoft Software and Systems Academy. If you're a veteran or a transitioning veteran and you're looking for your next steps, the Microsoft Military Affairs team should be on your radar, if nothing else. There's 3 different programs in cybersecurity, server admin, and cloud app development. And so if you join the cloud app development, there's a small chance you'll work with me as your trainer. If you join the cybersecurity or the systems admin, it'll be someone else. It's a 17-week program. It is entirely funded by Microsoft. So you, as a military veteran, can go do this for no cost and ultimately get connected with people at Microsoft. You get a guaranteed interview. That does not mean you get a job, but you get professional development and help with that. So if you're interested in that, always reach out to me. This is the easiest way to connect to me is LinkedIn, Brian L. Gorman on LinkedIn. I have the nice little picture thing there. You should recognize me hopefully now, and you can find me Major Guidance Solutions, Iowa State on there, and I'm in the Waterloo Cedar Falls area. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but whatever. So that's me, and I'd love to connect with you, even if you just want to shoot some questions my way or whatever. So that's basically the intro to who I am. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to talk about Azure Functions and really API management. This is more of a talk about API management, and I just use Azure Functions because they're easy APIs. You could do any API. It could be web API. It could be anything as long as you have an exposed endpoint. And in fact, what we'll do in this is we will actually hit someone else's endpoint. And the reason that I want to do that is to show, hey, this is a facade. What the whole reason we use APIM is to basically say, I want to expose one public endpoint, which you can actually put a custom domain on, expose that to the world and let them basically hit that endpoint with certain tokens or subscriptions. You can do certificate validation, you can do JOT validation, all the things you want to do on their side, on the client side, to bring people in and make sure that they're validated. What we're going to concentrate on today is how to set up APM and how to make it work internally. And that we're not going to look at the JOT token, we're not going to look at the certificates, but I can kind of point you in that direction if you're interested in learning more about that offline. So I want to give you kind of an overview of how you would go about working with APIM and how we can then make things a little more secure with Azure Functions. And I wanted to do a little more than that. I'll tell you right now that getting this into network has not been trivial. So getting a function app into a network is trivial, but having the APIM actually work, there's some DNS stuff that I'm still wrestling with. So I won't be able to show you that quite today, but maybe someday I'll get that working. But today we're going to do security kind of as if this was open to the world, which is one way to do it. But you obviously know when you have things open to the world, it's not as secure as it could be. And by that, I mean, we have this function app, right? So I've pre-deployed a function app. And you know what, actually, in order to expedite the process of this, let's come back to the function app. Well, let's go ahead and deploy an APIM up front. So you can kind of see what this looks like to do an API management service. So I already have one deployed just in case things go horribly wrong. That's all set up so I can demonstrate stuff, but it should be fine. We should be good, and we should be able to do our own today. So we're going to go ahead and deploy an API management solution into, and I'll just do the East US here. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call this APIM Functions, and then I'm going to call it Azure Cleveland. And I'll just put 2023-11/08. So I a lot of times will tag things with a date. It makes it unique, but also then I know, hey, this is probably a volatile resource I can destroy. We'll just call this AUG Cleveland. It doesn't matter what we put here at all, and we'll just say we'll just do sam@example.com for the email. So obviously, if this was a real world, you would put your org and your admin email there. So if things go wrong, you would get emailed or people could reach out to you. But we're doing this for fun today. So we're going to do a consumption tier. So a consumption tier allows you to have basically a free shared instance of APIM. So it is going to have a shared gateway, and that means that you can't put it on a network. It also means that it has a few more limitations like scaling and things that you can't do. And we'll talk about a couple of the other limitations as we go, but one of the bigger ones, in case I happen to forget later, is that it's you have a lot less granular control over what you can throttle from the client side into the APM, like things like you can't necessarily throttle by a subscription key like you could if you put a full one out. The other plans, so the developer plan is what you would put out if you're going to build your dev instance. There's no SLA on it though, so a lot of times it has some downtime just because of that, but it is a developer instance. But all the other plans, developer, basic, standard, and premium, they take about 40 minutes or 45 minutes to deploy. And the reason is because they do create their own gateway. So they do have, they don't use a shared gateway anymore, and therefore they're a little bit slower to deploy. But once they're out there, they're great. And with those plans, you also get an additional website that comes with it, which lets you have your front end. It's basically like Swagger, where you can have all your APIs listed and you can have developers come in and ask for a subscription key to start developing against your API. So obviously we won't get that at the consumption level either, but in those upper tiers you would get that. So we can talk about that more later if anybody has questions on that too. So the consumption tier is going to take about 5 minutes to deploy, so it's pretty nice. If you want to do App Insights, another limitation is you need to have your App Insights built ahead of time. So we're going to I already built an App Insights on top of a log analytics workspace so that I could have full monitoring should I want it. You can't scale, and you can create a managed identity, but I'm actually going to delegate this to later in the demo. So we'll pretend like it existed without it, and that's exactly what we want. You can't do virtual networking on the consumption plan, so you have to basically be public. So private endpoints aren't supported in the consumption tier. You can set different protocols if you want to use, HTTP2 or TLS1 or something. Some of the older protocols, if you want to turn those on, you can. SSL3. If you don't need them, you can leave them off, and it just uses the latest versions. And then, of course, everything can be tagged. So I'm just tagging everything as APIM demo, and just going to call this live APIM. So we'll go ahead and get this kicked off. Like I said, this will take about 5 minutes to deploy. And once it's done, then we'll have an APIM we can work with. Does anybody have any questions on different versions of APIM or anything that we've shown so far that you would want to have answered? Okay, so feel free to shout out a question in the middle of my talking if you need to. If you have anything you want to know, or if you see something that you're questioning, like what is that setting, we can definitely take a look at it and see what it's all about. Don't hesitate to interrupt me. It's basically where I'm going with that. Okay, so we have the APIM is going to be deployed as our main backend. We're going to have a simulated API that we've built as our company called the AUGC APIM Functions Demo Function App, and it has 3 functions currently. We have a public info app function where if we hit this, we can see it's going to basically just print out a string that says, "Thank you for using our stuff. Please contact your rep for more information," or something like that. So apologize that these might take a second to fire up. There we go. So thanks for choosing our company. Please contact your rep. And the other 2, basically, these are not rocket science functions at all. They're just returning the default strings. So you could build a function app in 5 minutes that would simulate everything we've done here. Just 3 different functions that have different outputs, basically. Just different string outputs. We're not doing anything, but you can extrapolate from that. Obviously, if you were creating your own, you could do all kinds of things once you have the function app deployed and stuff. So it doesn't have to just be returning a string, obviously. But that's what this is all about. It's giving us a function app that lets us have 3 different functions that we can kind of use to simulate, hey, we have a public thing, and then maybe we have a basic client function, maybe we have a premium client function. And actually the way APIM is going to work, the way we'll set it up today, we won't necessarily separate those, but I'll talk about how you could do that, and you'll see it as we go, should you want to do that. So nothing fancy here. And then let me get this going. So obviously with Postman here, I don't know if I can make this one bigger or not. Yeah, cool. Okay, so Postman is going to let us, let's start by closing all tabs. We'll save changes because I don't know what I did there. What I have is some environment variables here for the function app, the function keys for those public functions that I built already, and then APIM instance, which is we're building, client sub and vehicle sub we'll do in a little bit, and then we'll be creating some products. I'll show you that there too. And then what happens is we can make our calls. So right now the raw function to the public info, if this is working correctly and I have it up, I do not have permission. Oh, that's right, I'm on my dry run. So let me switch to the actual one for today. And let's run it again. Thank you for choosing our company. Please contact your rep. And the basic client function, thank you for being our client. The premium client says, thank you for being a preferred customer. So all 3 functions are easily accessible from public web at this point. which isn't exactly ideal. We're also going to be looking at a fourth function, which is actually going to be using nhtsa.dot.gov to go out and get some vehicle information. So you can see if we hit this, we get some vehicle information, and just real quick, you can actually do XML or JSON if you decide you wanted to do that, and that will be important for demoing another function feature for APIM in a minute. But you can see how easily that query string affects how your results come back either as JSON or XML. So those are the four main functions we want to actually wrap in the facade of our APIM and kind of make it so that everyone can see the public thing and only certain people can see the basic and premium, and certain things happen when we call to the vehicle one. The client doesn't even know that's what we're using, right? We're basically abstracting that backend from their view. They think they're just hitting our stuff. We're actually hitting the government site. So if you had a third-party APM or third-party API you were calling, your customers don't even know, which is really cool. So let's go look at the function app and the APIM. So we have these three functions. We need to expose those through the API. So our APIM is done. And let's see, where did it go? There it is. APIM Functions Azure Cleveland. So before I forget, I'm going to grab that name, which actually is just going to be part of the URL here. You can see that. And I'm going to drop that into Postman in my variables so I don't forget to do that. So I'll go to the APIM variables here, and the instance name is just that Azure Cleveland function name. So APIM name. So that way we'll be able to hit that in a little bit without any problem. So if you've never used APIM before, there are three main things you need to understand in order to get really good with it. First of all, how do you create the endpoints to get ingress? How do you work with those endpoints to secure them? And then how can you mutate either on the inbound or the outbound from your call chain? So if I send a call from the client, I can actually hijack that call with APIM and decorate it in a way that makes sense for my side that the client doesn't even know I'm doing. Or I can just let it go through as a simple pass-through. Or I can add additional policies to do things like throttle the IP if they're hitting me too often, or put request limits on. So to do that, though, I need to first create an API endpoint. So we'll be looking at APIs, products, and subscriptions in detail, and that gives us basically all we need in order to really get going with this. And from there, you can go deeper as you need to. As you get started, you're going to create APIs to expose those endpoints for the way that you want to wrap these things together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a simple API that's going to get that basic public function, and we're going to make it available to everyone. So you can see you can start by saying, I just want raw HTTP. So we'll do that for a third party, but you can also see that you can call the WebSockets, GraphQL, you can make gRPC calls, you can do OpenAPI, you can do old SOAP stuff. You can do OData. You can hit logic apps, app service, function apps, or container apps very easy from here. So we're just leveraging the function apps, but obviously you can see how easy it would be for you to use one of these other tools if you had a web API or a container that was hosted as an API. You can have that going on. So the first thing you do is when we create from your resource here, so this is a function app, you go get that resource. So I'm going to go ahead and select, and then I'll choose the AUGC APM functions demo, and that's the one that I want to expose. And you can see that it gives me which of these functions do I want. So for this first product, I only want the public info. So or this first API. So the only thing it's going to expose is our public info, and it says post here, so we have both get and post on that available. So I'm going to call this everyone, and for actually I'm going to call this public, excuse me. And then for the endpoint here, what you'll see is it's basically, if I don't have a custom domain, it's the exposed name of my API, and then whatever I put here becomes that URL. So if I say I want this to be public, like that, I can go ahead and do that. You can add tags, you can associate it to products if you have some. We don't have any yet. So you can kind of create in any order. You can create subscriptions, products, and APIs in any order, but you'll you'll mesh them together in a relationship to allow access to specific endpoints and things. So we're creating our APIM first endpoint here on this API. So the API name is public. It has two operations for an rpublic and an rpublic get and post. I'm going to go ahead and delete the post so that the only operation we expose is the get operation. And you can see that all of these will have a front-end endpoint, and then you have the ability to inject inbound processing. You can do stuff at the back end, so this is what it's calling. You can see that it's calling to that functions demo. You can add additional policies here as well on the inbound, on the back end, or on the outbound. So you can actually intercept the request back from your back end and decorate it or remove any sensitive information should you need to do so. For right now, we'll do a couple of those in a little bit so you can see all that. But you can use this test button right here, which gives us the ability to quickly and easily add query parameters or headers. You see the request URL is essentially the name of our app /public/our public info. So again, we're making that facade URL now. Instead of calling to the function app, we're calling to that, and we can go ahead and hit send. And provided we have access and everything, we get the 200 OK, and it says thank you for whatever the response body would be. So our first API is created. So before we move forward, now we have an endpoint, and I know that my endpoint is essentially this URL. So what I've done is I've created this part of the name is abstracted into this Azure Functions user group Cleveland. This part is abstracted into a variable, but the rest of this should be pretty good to go. So if I go here and we look at our variables, we see the function app or the APIM app name is there. And then we have the public API name, which is public. And if we look at our call to the public API for our public, we see the APM instance and that API name, our public info. So it's essentially the same route. I've just decorated with variables there so we don't have to keep redoing this. So I'm going to send this, and what you'll see is access denied. So the access is denied due to a missing subscription key. So right now, even though the APIM has that endpoint, it's blocking me because the client is not authorized. So we already have a level of security on that call that requires us to do some sort of manipulation to get our clients access to it, whether that's have them have a certificate that we inspect, and if they have the right certificate, let them in. We will use a subscription key today to lock down a couple things, or we can just decide this one is public. We don't need to lock it down at all. So that's what we're going to do. And the way that's easiest to manage these then is not to actually manipulate the API up front, but it's actually to create a thing called a product and expose the products to the client. That way we can group things together for our product groups, and then we sell that product to our clients and they can get in the way they need to. So if I go back to the APIM instance, and you see over here on the left, oops, sorry. Yeah, where's there it is, right there. So you see over here we have the products. So right now we don't have any products. So we're going to add a product, and we're just going to call this everyone. So this is everybody. The whole world can get in. And so basically this is our free stuff that requires no security, right, basically. So we're going to go ahead and publish this, and we're going to uncheck requiring subscription here because we're going to let this one be open to the world. So that error that we got was invalid subscription key. So you can kind of imagine what will happen when we expose this without requiring a subscription. So you select the API that you want to wrap in this product or multiple APIs, and then you say that's the product, and this one doesn't require a subscription. So now that the product is associated to that everyone, everyone API the everyone product is associated to the public API. Now I should be able to make that call from here, and we get in. So I'm no longer getting the error about the subscription key. So our public-facing everyone API is available. Now these aren't set up yet, so obviously they're still going to be broken. We don't even have them built. So let's go build another API. And this is where you need to start like planning ahead of time. Well, what do I want to expose through each API, and then how do I want to group specific APIs to give the customers what they need based on what our backend stuff needs to do, whether it's function apps, web apps, other calls, all of that stuff. So I'm going to add an additional API here. Now for simplicity today, I am using the same function app, just a couple different functions, but you can extrapolate that into multiple function apps, different endpoints, all that stuff to make it more robust in the real world. So in this API, I'm going to go ahead and do the basic and the premium. We're going to make this our customer API. And what we'll see is that because we do it this way, we don't actually have the ability to separate. If we do our product and we add this in, the product will have both the basic and the premium. So if you did want to have a separation of a basic and a premium function like this, you would actually want to create two new products, not one product. You'd create a basic customer product and a premium customer product, and then you would only expose the endpoints you want in those two products. I saw that I got a message, but I did not see what the message was. So if there's a question, I did not see it. I apologize. Okay, I won't be able to see it. So if you have a question, could you ask it out loud? That would be awesome, if it's possible. Okay, so we're creating a function. We're creating the product for customers. So we're going to call this customers. And our endpoint, we're actually just going to say customers as well. So it's going to map one-to-one here, a little different maybe than the other one. We'll create that customer's endpoint. That customer's endpoint, you see, has the 4 operations for get and post on basic and premium functions. Now, again, I could come in here and say, oops, this was wrong, and delete my 2 premium functions and just have the basic ones here and then create a customer's premium and separate those two. Yeah, that would be one way you could possibly go about that. So again, we just really quickly test everything real quick, make sure it looks like it works. So once again, we go back to the endpoint, we say, well, I want to hit this thing, and we get that subscription key thing. So now we need to say, well, if I want my customers to be able to hit this, and I want to be able to limit who can do that, I can sell these access through subscription keys. Now again, subscription keys, just like a function token, are really only as good as the worst player. So if someone has a subscription key and they sell it or give it away, then obviously it's being shared. You can start doing things with policies in the more advanced level where you can restrict IPs, you can throttle IPs, you can request, like make request limits. So if someone sells theirs to 10 people, they'll all pay the price because they'll be throttled. Things like that. But again, this isn't the end-to-all solution. If you're going to really be concerned, probably a certificate or a JOT token is a better approach to limit who's actually hitting your stuff. Again, we're more concerned with once they get in at this point, how do we keep our stuff secure inside of here? So we have the 2 endpoints for basic and premium, and we're really only using get today, but if you wanted, you could decorate a post and do something different in your function using the body. You would be able to get the request body just like a function app, or just like any other endpoint. It would basically pass that through. You can also decorate it. So it's really cool the things you can do there. Let's go ahead and create the product then. So this one's going to be our customer's product. And this is going to be our paying clients or something. And we're going to publish it. If we don't publish it, it's not available. So you can have some stuff that's not published and you turn it on when you're ready. This requires approval. Basically says if we're going to have a web page that's facing, then they're going to request a subscription token. And if we want to make sure that an admin allows that, we check request approval or requires approval, and they won't get a subscription until someone manually does that, or if you set up some automation around it, it goes through that check that you want to. You can also limit. You can say we can only have 50 people on this, 10 people, whatever. It's the number of subscriptions is limited to that. That's fine. And again, you can select the APIs you want. So in this one, we're going to go ahead and do customers. And just for fun, we can do public as well, even though it does not matter because the public is wide open. So as long as they have the endpoint for the public endpoint, which they would need either way, they'd be in. So go ahead and deploy that. Now we have our customers. So we have a product for the customers, and the product for the customer has the associated API for the customers and the public in this case, but really we only care about the customers one. But what you see is that currently it has a default subscription. Excuse me, this one does not have a default subscription. The APIM has a default subscription that's built in for all access. So you can use this as a developer to kind of get God mode. But if we still hit, even though we're in a product, so whereas the everyone, as soon as we got in a product and didn't require a subscription key, it said, sure, go through. And then when we hit this one, you still need that subscription key. So even though I've created the product, I haven't given them a subscription key. So I need to create that. Back here on the APIM. On the subscription, you can do it from this page. It's a lot easier if you stick with the product you're working on and go to the specific product, you know you're putting it in the right place. So I'm going to go ahead and add a subscription. And their names were going to be global for all of the API. So if I say basic here, I can't say basic here anywhere else. So what I typically do is say customers basic, and then name this display here as basic. It'll still show as basic, but it's got a unique name this way. If you want to be able to debug, you can turn this on to allow tracing. You put a header in your request and it will tell you more about what was actually happening with the processing through the chain. I'm not going to turn that on today, but if you're aware of it now, if you want to do some debugging, you could turn that on and see a little more there. So that's all it takes to create a subscription. I'm also going to add a premium one just for fun. We're not going to do anything with it, but you could say customers premium. And the reason I wanted to point this out is because you can, in the upper tiers, throttle based on subscription key. So let's say that I have a paying customer that pays me $10 a month and a paying customer that pays me $100 a month. And the $100 a month gets more throughput. I can throttle the paying customer that's only $10 a month to, let's say, 5 requests a minute, and the premium customer to, let's say, 100 requests a minute, right? So I can charge more money and give them a better throughput, and everybody's happy because you're making more money and you're not getting overloaded by everybody, and you have your customers getting the level of ability that they need to do stuff. So at the consumption tier, the limitation again is you can't throttle by the subscription key, but at the dev tier and higher, you would be able to. So I'm getting a really weird mouse conflict or something. So either one of these I could use for today. So I'll just grab a key from the basic and we'll throw that into our environment variable then for the client subscription key. So once I do that, we go back to our collection, and on our customers, we send this now, and you can see thank you for being our client. So now they have the access they need and they're in. So we've created a separate product that requires a subscription. So now the only people that could get in are people that have subscriptions. And this is important. The header must be this OCP APIM subscription key. That's what you put in the header with that client subkey or whatever that subscription key is that you give them to allow the request to be processed through. So we have a little bit of a paywall on the front side of our stuff, and we have some different products and different things that we can market and sell, all that jazz, and we kind of have that set up. The last one is, real quick, I just want to show, if we wanted to wrap a third party that has nothing to do with anything we did, I just want to show you how to do that real quick, because most of us are going to have a scenario where we're not just exposing our own, but we've purchased a third party that we've actually forwarded some requests to get information from, right? So let's create a final API that's someone else's. So this is the HTTP manually define an HTTP endpoint. So the full name of this one, or the display name, is just going to be the vehicles API. The description is the government VIN and vehicle info site or something API, I don't know. So the web service URL for this is, I gotta find it. Okay, so it is HTTPS VPIC NHTS whatever .dot.gov/API. So we're gonna do HTTPS. So the URL suffix is, again, I'm gonna add vehicles to this just because that's what's showing up on my side. So they're going to call to vehicles and maybe an additional URL based on the operation, and then that will expose endpoints that they think are ours that are actually going to transfer over to the dot to the DOT and get stuff from there. So there's our vehicles, and we don't have any operations, so we need to add an operation. So this one is going to be get all Hondas, and for that we need the endpoint of /vehicles /get make for manufacturer Honda. Now what's interesting is that this is going to make a really weird, this is get all the Hondas, and we'll save that. This makes a really weird URL where they actually have vehicles in there twice, but you could probably take some time and figure that out if you really wanted to. But you'll see there's your endpoint that you're exposing the vehicles, and then there's the vehicles get make for Honda. And actually, I think I'm missing API in here, so maybe not. We'll see what happens. Oh, it works. So there it is. So we're sending the Honda information, and you see that this is coming back as XML, which isn't ideal in today's world. Was great 10 years ago, right? Everybody loved XML until JSON came along. All right, so I got vehicles. So once again, just real quick, an exercise of utility here. Let's do it from the other side though. So whereas before we had kind of created subscriptions and stuff inside the products, again, we can go ahead and make a product here. We'll add the product for vehicles, and just for quick, require a subscription, use at your own risk, and this is just going to expose the vehicles API then. And let's add a subscription this way. So you see now all your subscriptions start showing up here, where again, you see the product here is customers, but the name is basic and premium. So if I add a subscription here, I'm just going to do vehicles, basic, and we'll just display name basic again. And you can choose if you want it to go, if this is a product or a subscription key, excuse me, for all of your APIs. You can do a single API, or you can do it based on a product. So whichever one you choose will allow you to expose that API. So this time I set out it's associated to a product, and then I just need to look at the product and make sure that in the product it's actually associated to the API. So if I forgot that step there, it would not work. Then I need that subscription key. You can see that it actually put it into the right place, even though I created it from the other side. Let's take that and drop it into our environment variable for the vehicle subscription. And then save that and go back to the collection, and let's call the vehicles, and we'll send it off. So there it is, and it came back as JSON because I told the customer I want you to have it in JSON, right? So we've actually decided that we never want them to get XML, and if we expose this like this, they can say, oh, I actually can send you this and get it as XML. So that's a problem. We don't want them to ever see to XML. We're only supporting JSON, and we don't want them to know that they could ever get XML, but somebody's a savvy URL hijacker, and they realized that it was simple for them to change that, and they did. So how can I make it so that this call, if they send without any query string at all, is always going to get me JSON? So right now, if I don't have a query string, it's coming back as XML. So how that works is I can go into the API, and I can then take a look at the policies on the API. So you have different levels. You can do a policy at the entire scope of your entire APIM. You can do it for specific APIs, or you can even do it for all operations or a single operation. So if you want to just hijack one operation, you can. You put your policies in inbound, outbound, or backend for each one, and each layer has a base. So obviously it's tiered and inherits from the others. So the more specific you get, the more it will override. So if I do something at the specific operation on an inbound, that will override the parent's all operations inbound. So I'm going to go to the vehicles, and I'm going to say on the get all Hondas, I don't want you to ever have to send me any query string. So I'm going to add a policy here, and you can see that I can filter IP addresses. I can limit the call rate by key. Again, that doesn't work on the consumption, but it will work on the other ones where you say subscriptions that have this specific level of requests per minute. You can send back mock responses if you want to build a test API. You can rewrite, you can do some other things. You can cache your responses to maybe speed up your responses if you can. You allow. Cool. So we're gonna in this one we're gonna go ahead and just hijack basically the inbound processing for that single call to get all Hondas, and we're gonna add a policy. And here you can see that I can filter IP addresses, limit the call rate, mock responses if I want to do testing, set query parameters, which is what we're gonna do. So I'm just gonna say format, and the value is gonna be JSON. And then I'm going to go ahead and override. So even if they get smart and put their own thing in there, if they use format at all, it's going to override it with JSON. So now going back to this call, it will be JSON because I've basically injected that query string. And if they realize they could have said, oh, format equals XML, you can still say, no, you can't get into this XML. Sorry, we've superseded you. So that's a really nice way to make sure you can kind of protect some of that stuff and make sure people aren't messing around with your query strings if you have sensitive information or potential for URL hijacking exposed. So that's kind of the overview of how to work with APIM, how to make this all work together, how to get it so that it's nice and set up for all my customers. But I have a bad player who decided to expose the function key on a function on the dark web, and all of a sudden everybody's hitting my stuff without even using my APIM. So the reason is because everything's available to the public. If you can go here and see it, they can hit the APM. They can bypass the APM and go directly to the function. So again, we're only as secure as the worst player. Somebody did that. So how do I start blocking things? Well, ideally, in a normal world, in the most secure way would be to put everything into a virtual network and make sure that there's absolutely no public access to the function app at all. Again, that's not a trivial thing to do. I was trying to set that up all day today so I could demo it, and it just has a lot of gotchas that I didn't expect. So I'm not there yet. So what we're going to do, though, is at least say that you can't get to this function app if you're not an authorized user, which means in order for you to be able to work on this app, you have to be in my tenant. So at least, the bad player from, the company down the road who got my direct URL can be blocked because they can't log into my tenant at Azure. And again, this is still only as secure as the worst player in my tenant. So if I have a disgruntled employee and they decide to do something, they could potentially cause me some harm. But at least I'm blocking the outside world at this point, even though I'm still on the public backbone, which is, again, not ideal. So how do I do that? On the function app, I go to authentication. So authentication. And I'm going to make this just a tiny bit bigger so it's a little easier to see for now. We're going to go ahead and select Microsoft, but you can see you can do Apple, Facebook, GitHub, Google, Twitter. You can do all the things if you want different stuff. So my tenant type is going to be workforce. I'm going to create a new app registration. This app registration is going to be an ID, basically service principal in Azure. Azure app registration allows me to set different things, different permission scopes, different things like that I can log in a user with, or I can use it to authenticate a user and use that authorization within my apps to give them different roles within my apps scenarios and things. It also allows me to do things like build in automation for deployments using service principals. That's what app registrations kind of do. So in this case, we're building an app registration to allow authentication against this Azure function, and basically saying only people from my tenant can get in. And we're going to require authentication, and if they aren't authenticated, we're going to redirect them. So we're going to use the token store. So we didn't change anything here. Excuse me. We didn't change anything here other than maybe just make it happen, right? The other thing that this was a gotcha when I first started doing this, recommended for APIs, 401. I thought, oh, that must be what I want because I'm building APIs. That's actually wrong because that doesn't let you authenticate. At that point, you're essentially stuck. So if you want the redirect in order to allow someone to authenticate, you need that turned on. And maybe you don't want them to be able to authenticate. Maybe you need to just say, sorry, and you'd be blocked. So you need the user read permission in order to be able to get the user's information from the Microsoft Graph to say this is who they are, they're authenticated in my tenant, and they're a good user. So we create that app registration. that associates to the Azure Function app, and we're going to need this client ID later for some things, so I'm going to grab it now. That client ID is the app registration client ID. So if you guys are familiar with third-party OAuth authentication, typically you have a client ID for your application, and if you're doing some more things, you might have a secret as well. So if I'm going to log in a user to Facebook, I create an app ID and get a secret. If I'm going to log in a user with Microsoft, typically I have an app ID and a secret in my app. We won't need the secret for this since we're kind of doing more client-side stuff, but then the good news is we already have the app ID, and that's the thing that we really need. So yeah, there we go. Right, so once we have that, the cool news is now I can't just go hitting my function. So if I try to hit this function now, it'll actually say you have to be authenticated. So if you're not in my tenant, you shouldn't be able to get in. And I'll go ahead and say my organization, everybody who is in my organization, we're going to authorize them automatically so they just get kind of passed through at this point. But what you'll see is I think it's going to error out this first time. Oh, it actually worked. Awesome. Cool. So sometimes the first time it's like throws an error and then it works the second time, but that time it worked right away. So now if I have authorization, I can get in, but if I don't, so if I go to an incognito window, I won't be able to do that anymore. They're blocked, right? Or they have to sign in order to use it. So we've kind of said, oh, at least if you have to be in my tenant now, which isn't still the most secure way because we're still in the public backbone, but at least you have to be a tenant user to connect. But as you can understand take a wild guess, at this point, even our public API is going to be broken with a 401. Customers, of course, will be broken as well. And even the vehicles that isn't using our stuff, the vehicle still works because it's still working because there's no authentication on the vehicle side that's blocking me. So public API that was available to everybody is suddenly broken, as the customer's API for both the for the APIM instance. So how do I wire that up? So again, if I was on a network, ideally we wouldn't even need that authentication. We would have blocked the internet, and then we would just say, we don't even need this level. We're good. But since we're on the public backbone, we're exposing it. Well, now my APIM needs to authenticate against that function app. And so in order to do that, it has to have a managed identity. So if you remember when we first created it, I said we could create the managed identity at the time of creation, but I skipped it to do it so that we could see it from this side. So if you're not familiar with managed identities, there's two types, system and user. So the system assigned managed identity is a life cycle for one-to-one, meaning that if I'm going to have an APIM or a function app or some resource in Azure, and it's going to have its own unique credentials or authentication in this case, I give it a system assigned ID. And so I'm just going to hit this and say save. And while that's creating that, I'll talk about user assigned. So let's say you have a fleet of VMs, or you have a fleet of app services, or whatever it might be that you're using maybe for an app pool or a Kubernetes cluster or whatever it might be, and they all need the same permissions. And you don't want to go to each NIC card or NSG or whatever you have to do to set the permissions for those for every machine. So what you can do is create a user assigned identity. User assigned identity then allows you to associate all of those different resources to that same user assigned identity. You assign the permission to the user assigned, and so all 5 VMs would have the same permissions based on that user assigned ID. The drawback here is that user assigned ID, when it's deleted, or when the resources are deleted, all 5 VMs are deleted, that security for the user assigned ID is still in my service. So I have to go in and delete that user assigned identity if I want to make sure it's gone completely. Otherwise, someone could accidentally reassign it to another VM and get those permissions right back. A system assigned, if I delete the APIM, this system assigned identity and all its permissions will get wiped out as well. So it's again one-to-one, so it's a lot safer and easier to work with when I have a single instance that has it. But what this did was it gave this thing an application, or what do we call it now? Entra. It gave an Entra ID that basically says this is a thing I can actually authenticate and say this is in my tenant. So all I have to do is be in the APIM, and then I'm in my tenant, but I have to tell the Azure function that I'm authenticating as this APIM. And so in order to do that, we can actually inject a new policy, which is actually a really easy way to do it. Go back to the APIM policies on the APIs. And again, we have vehicles here, which really doesn't need it. We could put the injection right here at the all APIs, but it would be sending it to the vehicles, which I don't think would hurt anything. It's basically going to say, I don't need this, just ignore it. But we can actually do it at the customers or the public. And again, at this point, we're going to do it for all operations within the API because these are all going against our stuff. So we're going to add a policy, and this policy is going to be a custom policy. So we can add our own custom policies here. And you can see the inheritance of calling to the base, and it's just XML. So you can put your policy in place here. And what we need is that app ID that we got off the Azure function earlier when we created it. We need to drop that in to a URL here, or into a policy, excuse me, into an XML statement. And what that does is it says, hey, I am going to use this managed identity, and my resource I'm authenticating against is this. So it's saying, as me, so I can't do this if I don't have a managed identity, which is why we had to create the managed identity. So as me, go and authenticate against this resource. And then I can say, oh, yep, I'm authenticated. And once I do that, my operation should just work again. Sometimes this takes 5 magic minutes to apply. So if I hit the other APIs here really quick, not sure what's going on. Am I losing my internet again? Oh, it's there. It's just buried. Customers. So this is the other thing. Like the policy is there. It's right there. And it's thinking I'm going to discard it, but it's there. So we'll save it again, and then make this smaller. Go back and do another one here. It's the exact same policy here, which is a little bit not ideal, but once we have that in place in the right places and get that all saved, give it a minute to think. We can try, again, we can try testing it from here and see if it works now. We don't get the 401. We can see it is getting a 200 OK. So then we should be able to go back here and we should say hit our public again. And now it's authenticating as the APIM against the function app, and it lets it through. So we basically have created a public route through our APIM into that function app that blocks anybody who's not in our tenant, the function app side, and the APIM lets them go through because the APIM authenticates as a valid path in. But that keeps it a little bit safe. So you can do the same thing with an app service. Obviously, you can create an app registration to authenticate against an app service, and then do the same thing if you had a web API that you were doing in an app service. Same thing with container apps or potentially logic apps as well, where you basically are exposing endpoints. Same type of thing. You just make sure that they're locked down, they're not publicly accessible, or they have to be authenticated against, and then you can hit them. So really, I think that's pretty much everything that I have for today. One thing I will show you, like I said, I was trying to mess around with this, so bear with me 1 second, and I'm going to go ahead and switch to this one. And I'll just show you real quick if I can. The APIM's out there. I can't get this one to join the network at this point, but this was a premium tier APIM that I built. That's the wrong one. APIM and a VNet, that's the one I was looking for. Okay, so this one has a developer portal API as well, since this is the premium tier. So you should be able to go out there and see, I don't have access or something. I don't know what that's all about, but I don't play around with the developer portals a lot. So that's where you can get to. Where did it go? APIM and a VNet. See if we can hit this way. So ultimately, this is where you can have your exposed public URL. It's got kind of like a Squarespace or like any content management system, drag and drop to admin the pages and publish the pages. So you can see how users can, sign in to do your APIs, and it's really kind of pretty generic out of the box. I think if I click on this, it's actually not going to take me to the page, but yeah. So you can do all kinds of like drag and drop stuff, but you can see like different pages you can go to, you create different pages, and eventually, this Explore APIs. If I hit this, that's what I wanted to do, was actually just hit this directly so we could see it, but you would be able to click on the Explore APIs, and then it would show any APIs you've basically manually exposed through this thing, and then a button to get subscriptions if you were asking for permissions to get subscriptions and things. So you get that built in to the bigger tiers. With the bigger tiers, you also can do, again, networking. You get the throttling. So on the policies, I guess I didn't show this, but on the policies, say for the customers here, if I wanted to say, we had some bad players, and I want to do on here, let's say I wanted to do a policy to filter the IP. You could say allow IP, add the IP filter. Let's just say 10.10.10.10 to 10.10.10.11 or something, right? So if you try to do this, so IP filtering looks like it's going to work. So I can actually do that. You see it drops in that XML for the allow range there. But if I try to do the throttling by key, it's going to block me on this consumption plan. So if I try to say I want to throttle by limit the call rate by key, so then I can say I want to do 500 calls over 60 seconds. The subscription can be the key, or it can be an IP address, or it can be something else. So you can say per IP address or per subscription key. Again, this is where that basic and that premium subscription could come into play. And then different responses, like, so you could say any request or successful only. So we try to save this on the consumption. Oh, look at that. It let me do it. Oh, look at that. It didn't. Okay. So yeah. So it basically says rate limit by key policy is not allowed in consumption SKU. But I could take this same rate limit by key and go back to my premium one. And if I had an API out here that let me select the customers here, I have the API. I can go to this one and I can say, add the policy here. And I'll just throw that in there. And now I can do that this tier. I can basically say if the subscription, by subscription key, or they're anonymous. And then I think, the other thing is you can do some if statements, some kind of like case win statements like in SQL, some things like that on your policies. And this is also where you would inspect if you were going to do certificates and JOT tokens. This is where you would inspect those things as well, or add those things here. So maybe you wanted to add a policy for a JOT or something. It doesn't let me do it there, huh? Okay, but add a policy. There we go. So like validate JOT, right? So there's one. You can do that here and add that in. Validate certificates. You got like the thumbprint that can match, or the signature or something. There's a couple different things you can do with there as well. But that's probably all I have for today at this point, since I didn't get this one wired up to the network. Ideally, take that forward and know that while the function app is now more secure than it was, because we've basically blocked public access, in the real world, I would probably, as an architect, want to make sure that that thing wasn't even exposed to the public. I'd put it on a VNet. I would then also pay a little more for the APIM up front to have the VNet capability, maybe use some private endpoints or VNet integration, whatever that would look like, to make sure that the only connection to that function app happens across the private backbone. And then I don't have to worry about anybody having access to it, because it's you're on the network at that point. Cool. So any questions on all of that? Thoughts, concerns?
There's a question in chat. Did you get a chance to address that? Pardon me.
I did not. I can't see the chat, so.
Oh, sorry. So the question is, do you have to use Azure Portal to manage APIM?
Hmm.
Can you deploy to APIM from Visual Studio? Assuming that you want to deploy your Azure Function project to Azure Web App resource, and then import one or more functions into APIM.
Correct. Okay. So these are great questions, and actually two different things to address there. So if I want to automate all of this stuff, the first thing I would do is exactly what you're saying. I would build out automation like in GitHub Actions or ADO pipelines, or GitLab Actions, or whatever your flavor of source control is, that do the deployment into the app service or into the function app. I wouldn't even worry about APIM at that point. Where APIM gets interesting is you can put your APIM into GitHub. So like you can define the whole thing into a GitHub repo, and that way, if it gets blown away or something, you should be able to do it. And then with that in mind, you would be able to hopefully get your stuff back, as well as define, know that if I have my APIM APIs and things like that, I would be able to. Not sure where it's at exactly, but I know that there's a way for me to, or at least there used to be a way for me to directly integrate this to GitHub or another source control. So the second part of your question then is, yes, you should be able to have security in your mind, at least, of knowing that my APIM is defined in some sort of JSON or XML or whatever, YAML. I don't know what it looks like, honestly. That is then managed in source control as well. As far as the deployment then, can we then deploy from GitHub into the APIM? I would assume the answer to be yes. Again, I've never done that personally, so I'm speculating. So don't take it as like the word of God, but I would say I would be really surprised if I couldn't automate that from a GitHub or an Azure DevOps, because of the fact that this is it's such a lot of configuration, that if we couldn't do that, it would be a massive pain for us if it failed somehow. Like if someone went in and deleted our APIM and we had to get back up and running in 5 minutes, we'd be in really big trouble, right? So if anybody knows where that's at, I'd love to. I could do a quick Google foo or Chat GPT. How do I integrate APIM with GitHub? So that's exactly how you do it right there. So it's under repository, it looks like. Maybe.
Can you paste that link at the chat?
Yeah. I gotta find it. Where is the chat in this client? Like.
So you should see the chat icon in the upper right-hand corner.
Oh, there it is. There it is. Okay, cool. So there's the learn document. Save the service configuration to Git repository. Get your access credentials. Clone it to your local machine. Update your local with most current. Push the changes from local repo to the server repo. So yeah, so we should be deploy service configuration to the API management service. So there you go. So we should be able to automate the whole thing using GitHub or another Git repository. These are great questions, by the way, because yeah, this would not be a very feasible option if we had 47 APIs that were all configured with 3 different products or something, and then somebody blew it away and we couldn't just quickly restore that. That'd be really bad.
Hurt.
Yeah.
Excellent. Does anyone have any? Excuse me. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Brian? Feel free to come off of mute or enter your questions in chat. All right. Doesn't look like we have any more questions, and so with that, we'll have to say thank you, Brian. Highly appreciate it. Learned a lot. It was very informative.
Cool.
And just if you don't mind, I need to take back the screen. Just have some concluding announcements.
Yep.
And so if you take a peek over in your chat window, you'll see that there are several links that are posted there, and we'll go through those at this point. And so As far as the recording of the presentation, it will be edited and uploaded to YouTube in just a couple short days. And if you would please subscribe to the channel to get upload notifications. Likewise, the link to my blog is also in the chat window, and we'll be covering the tech events in just a second. But all that content is posted on my blog as well. And lastly, the eval form. If you would please take a moment to fill that out to provide Brian with some constructive criticism. For those that joined us shortly after the start of the meeting, there's a 35% off offer from Manning.com on a selection of books. The link for that, as well as the discount code, are posted in chat. And with regards to regional events, on November 20th is the Cleveland C# user group. We're going to be having John Skeet presenting. And then another treat, also in November 30th, is another meeting of the Cleveland C# user group. That time it's going to be with Jeff Fritz discussing .NET 8 and the release thereof. As far as regional conferences, Tech Bash is currently happening, and you can find meeting information posted at techbash.com. November 8th through the 9th is GitHub Universe. That is an online conference free of charge. The link for that is also posted on my blog. And November 14th through the 16th, .NET Conf. That is a 3-day event of online presentations worldwide, and it's going to be revolving around the release of .NET 8. And then on December 12th, if you're interested in AI, there's the Global AI Conference, which is a 24-hour period of presentations from various speakers all over the world, all revolving around AI. One of the things that we always like to do is discuss job openings. So TechSystems has job openings available at techsystems.com/IT-jobs. But we always like to ask who's hiring and who's looking. So if you would please make yourself known in chat or verbally, whether you're hiring or you're looking for work. And if not, you can always reach out to me afterwards. My contact information, snasser@nistechnologies.com. You can also find me on Twitter @SamNasser. The link to my blog, once again, samnasser.blogspot.com. And lastly, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, I invite you to do so. And so with that, thanks again to Brian for a very informative presentation. Thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing you all at the next month's meeting. Good night, everyone.